Welcome back everyone. Today I'm going to show you the Concorde Platinum Tour here in Manchester. Obviously we will be getting on board this beautiful Concorde, which is now obviously retired, but we'll show you what it's like, the interior, and even with the nose dip. So enjoy. So obviously part of the Concorde tour, you're going to be at the Runway Visitor Park, where you will see planes landing and going from here. So a lot of families just come here having chips and probably their drinks. So you can actually just bring your family if you like plane watching. So go for it, don't miss out. Runway Visitor Park. So when you do the Concorde Platinum, you get this parking token. Just go to the reception and they will validate this for all day parking. We'll actually first start just here in the theater room, where they hopefully, I think, will debrief us or give us a history about Concorde here. So we're going to start in about 10 minutes, and this is the start of the Platinum Tour. we're getting on board the Concorde for the Platinum tour here. So it's quite an impressive machinery, engineering machinery here. So check out what's inside. Hello.
Hi there.
Amazing.
Passenger configuration aircraft ever ordered and built. So Alpha Charlie, even though it's not first in sequential in terms of its registration, BOAC was the name of the British national carrier, British Overseas Airways Corporation. That's why this aircraft carries that iconic registration. And this aeroplane first flew on the 27th of February 1975. Now that was before certification had been granted for Concorde, and as a consequence, even though this was a passenger variant rather than a prototype aircraft, this actually did join the test program for about a year under BAC's flight test program, and it predominantly did what they call the endurance flight testing. So for about a year it was with BAC, and during that year, when it did the endurance long range high speed high altitude flight testing, this aircraft crossed the Atlantic 4 times in one day, believe it or not. Now in front of the pilots here you've got the analog flight instruments for the captain and the first officer. Up here you've got basically the interface between the pilots and the aircraft. So once the pilots were happy that the aircraft was doing as they wanted, they could engage the autopilot and the flight director, and then they could manipulate the modes and values on these rudimentary mechanical dials and things. Then you've got the engine instruments for the 4 Rolls-Royce Olympus 593 twin spool axial flow turbojets, and these are the controls for them, the 4 thrust levers. Now every takeoff in Concorde was a full thrust takeoff. They never used, like modern aircraft, an assumed temperature or a flex thrust takeoff. It's always full thrust. So pilots are select full thrust, and then these 4 white switches here would be to use to control the reheat or the afterburners. And when they selected those on, you would get on the EGT indications, you'd get these white lights would come on to tell the crew that the afterburner was burning correctly. Now before flight, the pilots could select whether they needed 4 or 3 afterburners operating. So if one failed and they could depart with 3, they were good to go. If they needed 4, they'd have to reject the takeoff. Now with the reheat and full thrust, the aircraft is now producing about 20% more power than it would what they call dry heat without reheat. So each of the engines is producing about 38,000 pounds of thrust. Incredibly high output for the time. And It's also quite noisy and quite thirsty. So at takeoff, this aeroplane burns about 33 litres of fuel per second. Yeah, so my little Toyota Hybrid, which has got a 43 litre tank, and I can go about 960 kilometres on a tank of fuel. This aeroplane would drink that in about 1.2 seconds on takeoff. Now, once they got to 1,000 feet, they'd go into noise abatement procedures. So they bring the thrust levers back to climb power and switch off the reheat. They couldn't fly above the speed of sound over the land because of the sonic boom, so they'd maintain about Mach 0.95. Once they arrived at the Bristol Channel on the way to the US, they'd go back to full thrust, and they'd reignite the reheats 2 at a time. The 2 inboard engines first, and shortly afterwards the 2 outboard engines. They did that so they didn't get too much of an acceleration burst, so the passengers wouldn't spill their expensive drinks.
So when they say reheat or afterburners, what because I've heard that so many times, what does that actually...
So basically on a jet engine, what you've got is you've got the exhaust nozzle, and you've got the exhaust gases coming out at very high velocity, and that adds to the thrust of the aircraft. But I don't know whether you know much about old steam engines. They could recycle the steam, basically, and what they do is that air or the gas that's coming out of the exhaust nozzle still has lots of oxygen left in it. It's not all completely burnt, and what they do is they reintroduce raw fuel into the exhaust and ignite it in a combustion chamber with some igniters.
So that gives it extra,
and that gives it that 20% bigger
20%
more.
Wow.
Yeah. But the consumption goes off the charts, really. It does. Each engine in reheat burns about 6,000 imperial gallons per hour, so 24,000 gallons an hour for all 4 running. So you don't want them running for long. It's about 12 minutes to Mach 2 from 0.95. Once they got up to Mach 1.7, they'd switch off the afterburn. They didn't need it. They could super cruise without it. The engine intake's got a very clever variable geometry intake with using hydraulic rams to slow down the airflow, and that actually allows the intake to produce about 65% of the thrust in the cruise. The engines are only producing about 30% of the thrust. It's quite clever, well, more than quite, it's an incredibly clever system. And once they got to the cruising altitude, Concorde typically would cruise at about 60,000 feet, but it was certified to 68,000 feet with passengers. But 60,000 feet was kind of typical. Once they got there, thrust levers had come back to cruise power, and the aircraft is now flying at its most efficient, apart from during the descent when the thrust levers are in the closed position. Now at Mach 2.02, you're flying at 2,200 kilometers per hour. That's about 1,355 miles an hour. And just to put that into perspective, that means this 185-ton aircraft with 100 passengers and 9 crew is flying faster than a rifle bullet. It's mind-bogglingly fast. If you were able to fly supersonic over the land and you flew across the top of Manchester Airport now and flew in a straight line towards London, you'd cross over the centre of London in about 6 minutes. So it's just about 38 kilometres a minute you're cruising at. This is quite crazy stuff, really. Now, at that speed, you generate an awful lot of heat because of friction with the air molecules passing over the surface of the aircraft. And the nose of the airplane would reach about 127 degrees centigrade, way hotter than boiling water. And that was a limiting factor for the aircraft's cruising speed. As soon as you reached that temperature, you couldn't accelerate anymore. And the reason that was the case is because when the aircraft absorbed some of that heat, it started to stretch and actually expand in flight by about 270 millimetres, about 10 inches. And the engineers knew and anticipated this, and they designed into the aircraft some expansion points. And there's one here in the flight deck that you can see just behind you there. I've got my little laser pen, make sure it's switched on. It is. Right, do you see where the door frame bulkhead meets the flight engineers panel, just down there? Yeah. You can just about get your fingertip in that little gap there. Yeah? Perfect. Now, when the aircraft was accelerating and starting to heat up, that expansion gap would open from the bulkhead forwards as this part of the airframe got hotter. Now, the flight engineer sitting in their seat here, we've got a bird's eye view of that actually happening. Must have been quite unnerving, I've got to say. Now, on the very last flight of any Concorde, Alpha Foxtrot, the one that's preserved at Bristol, that flew a couple of weeks after this one made its last flight. And on that flight, the delivery flight for preservation, they went supersonic because they could. And the flight engineer thought to himself, I'm never going to fly supersonic again. How can I be remembered in 20 years' time? So while they were flying at Mach 2 and the expansion gap was fully open, he took off his pilot's hat and he got the rest of the crew to sign inside the hat, and he placed his hat in the open expansion gap. Of course, when the aircraft slowed down for its approach into Bristol, it started to cool down and started to shrink to its normal size, trapping his hat in the expansion gap forever. So the only way to take that hat out is to go fly at Mach 2, which isn't going to happen. So nearly 22 years later, we're still talking about this clever clogs engineer Now, another thing that is unique about Concorde, which we're going to show you in a short while, is the fully articulating nose of the aircraft. Because the aircraft has this unique delta wing design, it's called a double ogival vortex delta wing. Because of that wing design, and the aircraft doesn't have any slats or flaps, to fly at or to generate enough lift at low speed, you have to present the wing at a very, very high angle attack. Typically, on an approach to land, the aircraft's nose is about 10.5 degrees above the horizon. On a normal aeroplane, it's about 1.5 degrees. So that, combined with the fact the aircraft has an extremely long nose, the pilots actually physically couldn't see the runway, which is not a desirable situation. So the engineers came up with a very elegant solution. They use a hydraulic system. I'll be using this lever a little bit later on. And when I move that, the first stage, the visor lowers into the nose cone. Second stage, the nose lowers to 5 degrees, and the last stage, the nose lowers down to 12.5 degrees, which is the approach and landing configuration. And that's how the aircraft will look. So the primary window right in front of us doesn't move, it's pressurised. The visor is now partially stowed inside the nose cone, and the nose is down at 12.5 degrees. And that's the view the pilots got out of the window when they were on an approach line. It was just like a conventional aeroplane. So this picture is really special because it was taken by Captain Mike Bannister. You saw him on the video there. He was the chief pilot for Concorde when they retired them, and he was one of the crew that delivered this aircraft to us on the 31st of October 2003. He was sitting in this seat, and just before they landed here on runway 05 left for the last time, he took out his camera and took a cheeky little snap. I'm sure he broke a few company procedures with that one, but we're very pleased that he did. So we've got a recording of the aircraft's very last moments in flight. And that's where it ended, I'm afraid, for this one.
We saw it years ago, didn't we?
Concorde
take off from here.
Yeah, well, Concorde's visited Manchester about 260 times over the years.
Would that be a shuttle run?
No, they would do a lot of special charter operations. Yeah, so you could do supersonic experience flights. They would run about every month or so. So you'd fly from here.
So you can actually witness the nose actually dipping there when you do the Platinum tour. So how amazing is that? What's amazing part of this tour is you will be getting some champagne over there while we actually look at the engine. Cheers everyone. Cheers, cheers, cheers.
Did you just get orange juice and no champagne?
Grab the orange. So that is the Concorde Platinum Tour experience here in Manchester Airport. I do highly recommend you do the Platinum Tour. I think it was well worth it. Great knowledge from the staff showing us the actual tour. Amazing plane. I wish I can turn back time and be able to have flown on the majestic Concorde. It just is amazing, an engineering marvel. So if you did like this video, don't forget to hit that like, subscribe, and go on that notification bell. Until next time, keep flying.